potential. I've got that tree over there, which I'm going to work in a minute. Want to work the water in front of me first. There we go. Hi, Peter Charles here for Fly Fishing. And today let's look at an introduction to Euro Nymphing. We'll look at what it's about, how it's effective, how it works. Now, before we get started, I have to say this is not one of my favorite methods of fishing for trout. I'm more likely to swing a streamer or a wet fly if I don't see any dry fly activity. But it is highly effective, and I do use it on occasion, and I never fail to catch fish. And you're also more likely to pull up the big ones using this method as well. So it's not about effectiveness, it's just the way I like to fish. The other thing I like to mention is this is sort of a generic discussion of Euro Nymphing. It isn't any one of the many styles that are out there. I mean, there's Czech nymphing, French, Polish methods, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to get into any of that. So if you're a Euro nymphing purist, this isn't the video for you, because I am not going to get into that kind of detail. I'm keeping this basic and general about what Euro nymphing is really all about. And people can take it from there if they're interested. So let's get into what this really means. You've probably heard the term multiple times, and you're saying to yourself, okay, fine, does that mean I have to buy a fly made in Europe? You know, what's the score? Well, the simplest way to think about this is Euro nymphing, and I'm not saying this in a prejudicial manner at all, but Euro nymphing is really a crossing over point between conventional fishing and fly fishing, because we are not using the fly line to load the rod. We're not using the fly line to make the cast. We're using the weight of the nymphs to do that. And generally speaking, most often we're using 2 nymphs on the leader, maybe even 3. That weight in those nymphs, because they are heavily weighted, will turn over the leader and straighten it out, enable us to fish. So this obviously is a very close range style of fishing, if you're going to be using just a leader to make a cast. So in many, many respects, it's using weight and casting mono as opposed to using the weight of a fly line. I don't care about the discussions of whether this is fly fishing or not. I really don't care. It's done with a fly rod and it uses flies, so as far as I'm concerned, it's fly fishing. So I'm going to leave that aside, but that is an important part of the mechanics, is the weight of the flies are used to make the cast, not the weight of the fly line. Now, this is the reason why the lines that are used in Euro nymphing, you really, there's nothing but running line. I mean, this is the Airflow Euro nymphing line, and what makes it unique is, first off, it's extremely thin, but it has an orange front end, so if you want to get that out of the guides for any reason, you'll be able to see the end of your fly line very clearly. So that's, and the back end of it's all olive colored. So it's designed for Euro nymphing, but I mean, if all you had was some running line, use it. That's not a problem. So the line itself is pretty well irrelevant. A lot of the time when we're fishing this style of nymphing, we don't even have the line out of the guides. I mean, it's all just all leader from the tip top onto the water. So let's talk about the next step, which is the leader, because they are very, very unique. First off, you can buy leaders. So this one is French, and it's for the French system. There's a variety of them on the market. You can, pick them up. You're probably better mail ordering them from the UK or from somewhere on the continent, but you can make them yourself. So I'm going to talk first off about how I make my leaders. And no, they don't fit any of the other genres in Euro nymphing. They're just the way I do it. But it works for me, so I figured if it works for me, it'll work for a few other people as well. First off, my butt sections are good old Maxima, Chameleon Maxima, the brown stuff. 20-pound test and 12-pound test is generally what I'm using. This stuff is stiff, and it's brown. And those are the 2 reasons why I use it. Being stiff, it helps to turn things over. And being brown, it's a contrast between what comes next. So the butt section being brown, especially for my waters, I'm able to see it clearly. Another alternative would be to use the slime line that center pin users often use. It's bright chartreuse. That's another choice. You can do it that way too. But anyway, my butt sections are generally Maxima. It's nice and stiff, turns over well, and it's dark. So I can pick up the transition to the next step, which is what we call the citer. And usually they're made up of 3 sections. Here I've got orange and pink. And I will, let's say, for sake of argument, 2 orange, 1 pink, or 2 pink, 1 orange. I'll have 3 sections. Each one's roughly 15 inches, 18 inches long. And that section is tied to the butt. Now, at the end, and you won't be able to see this on camera, you'll just have to kind of take my word for it. But what I do to make life simple for myself is right there at the end of this citer section is I put a tippet ring. Now, I'm a big fan of tippet rings because they give us easy attachment points when we have to change frequently. If I didn't have a tippet ring and I was changing this section of the fluorocarbon, I would be continually nibbling back into my citer, then I'd have to put another one on, blah, 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 blah. This way, the citer is never changed, never damaged. Now, from this point on, I'm using fluorocarbon. And as I've said in other videos, fluorocarbon sinks very well. It's a higher density than mono. And I found that if you buy good quality stuff, it's also stronger than mono. Just a little bit stronger, not a lot, but a little bit stronger than mono for the same diameter. So I create another section, and this is usually 4 or 5x. And I go all the way down, and there's another tippet ring. So what I've done here is this section here, most of the time, will not change. That bit right there is more or less constant. However, I will reduce that if I have to. This is the part that I adjust all the time, and this is the tippet section that goes down to the fly. Also, this tippet ring here, if my local regulations allow for it, and most places they don't, but in the few places that do allow for it, I will put a dropper off the tippet ring, so it'll give me a second fly. So, as I say, this is just a local problem for me. Most of my trout water is single barbless hook only. You cannot use 2 flies. But where I can, that second tippet ring becomes the place where I tie in my dropper. So this bit here gets replaced frequently. So that way, again, my leader is very durable, and I'm sacrificing just this last bit whenever it gets too short, too nicked up, whatever the case may be, or I've had to change flies way too often. But also the other thing too is if I snag up and break off, I'm just losing this section. I'm not losing anything else in the leader system. The total length of this leader is about 15 foot, 18 foot, in that ballpark. And the distance between the citer, which is right here, down to the fly, is roughly the depth of the water. So you're probably thinking right now that the purpose for the citer section, which is roughly 4 foot of these alternating colors that I've got right here, you're probably thinking right now, well, that's so you can detect a strike. Actually, the biggest reason for having these is so you can judge your depth. Because just like nymphing under an indicator, you want to be just running along the bottom. You don't want to be 2/3 the way up the water column. You're only going to catch fish if your nymph is right on the bottom. So that's why we have the citer, to be able to judge how deep we want to run the fly. We can tell where the water is, the water level is, according to the citer. So if I'm touching bottom too much, I can move this up, and I can make my judgments as to how far down the fly is getting. And so this end of it may get adjusted if I'm fishing shallow water or deep water. The below the citer is the bit that gets adjusted to make up for, shallow or deep. There's something else too. When you're building your leader, you have to give a consideration to the type of water you're going to be fishing in. Is it relatively shallow and fast, or is it relatively deep and slower? That will affect how you put your leaders together as well, because you're running a little different. If you're dealing with fast-moving water and the current will tend to keep the flies off the bottom, you might be fishing at more of a shallow angle, a little further out, a little shallower. Whereas if you're fishing deeper water, you're more off the rod tip and a little deeper down. So that's going to have some impact on how you put your leaders together as well. But as I say, 15 to 18 foot is roughly what I'm using. You will see other leader lengths being given out. That's by no means an absolute, but it's a good place to start. So let me recap. You're going to start off with some maxima for your butt. You're going to use some colored mono to create your cider section, preferably 3 components. And you can buy this stuff that's dedicated for making Euro Nymphing leaders, but it's expensive. This stuff was cheap. So your choice, whether you want to buy the dedicated stuff or buy the cheap stuff. And then we finish off with some fluorocarbon for the rest of the leader. The top end is mono, the bottom end is fluorocarbon. And the fluorocarbon is because that sinks. Okay, let's get on to the flies. I was going to say the minnows. The flies. These are often tied on a jig hook with a tungsten slotted bead. The tungsten slotted bead enables us to put a relatively heavy, large bead onto a small hook and get it around the gape. If you've ever tried to put a bead on a hook and you can't get it around the gape, the slotted bead is there for that reason. And these fit on the jig hooks. And what's very, very interesting when you look at one of these flies, when you suspend it from your leader, it's level. And the hook point rides up. And they're barbless hooks, and they have extra long points. So their holding qualities are quite good. And they really do resist snagging up because they're riding point up, which is an important part of this, because you're bouncing along the bottom a lot, and you don't want to be tying on new flies every 30 seconds. So this jig hook style will keep the hook point off the bottom, resist snagging up. It will snag up occasionally, but obviously, but you know, you're going to reduce your odds of a snag up by using these hooks. And they're relatively light wire hooks, so they penetrate quite well. But then again, you're using that tungsten bead to do 2 things. Get the fly down, and also help you make the cast. You need that weight. So you'll often see that these flies are tied with some pretty big tungsten beads, bigger than you would expect for the size of the fly. It doesn't seem to bother the fish at all. They'll still grab it. So, okay, we've got our line, our leader, our flies. Let's talk about the rods. This is an NRX Euro Nymphing rod. It's 10 foot 4 weight. You'll see 10 foot 3 weights, even 10 foot 2 weights. They're long because we need to reach to make our drift. So the longer the rod, the better. Now, if all you have is a 9 foot rod, yeah, use it. But you're just going to be more effective with a longer rod. So, and the other thing about a rod that's built for Euro Nymphing is the tip is fast enough and active enough that it will cast those weighted nymphs without being loaded by the line. If you have a conventional rod, it may not load up at all, and you might have difficulty getting the flies out there. So you want a rod with a very, very light, quick tip. So if you have a standard rod and 9 foot rod and it has a very quick, fast tip, that'll probably work for you. If it's more of the bend down to the butt type of rod, especially if it's relatively stiff, it's probably not going to do as good a job. So the Euro Nymphing rods are not a gimmick. They're actually designed to cast just the flies. But if you've seen the videos I've made on this rod, you'll know it can do other things too. So you're not limited just to Euro Nymphing with it if you want to do other things. But it's a great rod for just getting those weighted flies to turn over. So that's basically it in terms of the tackle. Now let's talk about the fishing. The method is a short range technique. So you're fishing a run. You're looking at a seam or a run. You try to avoid the flat water. You can fish it, but it's I'm not saying you can't catch fish with it, but this method was designed to work in current and fish seams and riffles and other such features. It's close range, obviously, because we're not casting any fly line, we're just casting the leader. And the important thing with Euro Nymphing is that we lead the nymphs through the run. We don't come from behind with the rod. And that's very different from if you're used to fishing with nymphs under an indicator. you're going to be following behind the indicator as we go down the run. In this case, we're actually leading the flies down the run. And you might actually vibrate a little bit to make the flies dance, look like they're trying to swim. So you can bring your rod tip down, keeping tension, because that brings us to the next step, strike detection. You've probably been thinking that all the way through this presentation, saying, okay, well how do I know if I got a fish on? Well, when we use the Euro Nymphing leaders, we're going to have the line in our left hand, if you're right-handed. So I've got my rod here, but I've got the line here, and I keep it tight. I'm tight to the flies at all times, and I will actually feel that take in this hand. So I'll feel a little doink when a fish takes it. Sometimes it'll take it hard, sometimes it'll be subtle. Sometimes you'll just see the line stop moving. So it's going down the river and it just stops. That's a fish. It could be a rock too, but good chance it's a fish. So you're looking at either seeing the line stop, or you're going to feel in your left hand, you're going to feel a little tunk, which tells you that you got a fish. And it's interesting, you fairly soon get to feel the difference between rocks and fish. After you've done it for a little while, you go, oh, that's a rock, oh, that's a fish, and you'll see the difference. The other thing I tend to do, which I notice other people who use the method don't do, is that I will swing my flies out at the end, whereas a lot of guys will just go boom, drift, bang, drift, bang, drift. And their drifts are like 5 or 6 foot long. It's very, very quick little turnovers, bang, 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 bang. And they work a run over and over and over. They'll sit on a run for quite a while and just keep working it. And often, they'll work a spot for about 10 minutes and then they get a fish. So it's worthwhile trying it. I, on the other hand, because I like to swing flies, I will cast out, do that drift, and then I'll swing it out of the bottom. And as that nymph begins to lift, I often get a fish, because that's imitating the emerger state when the nymphs come off the bottom and start to going up. You've ever heard of the lasering lift? That's a lasering lift, basically, is what I'm doing. As soon as that fly begins to lift and swing, I often pick up a fish. So that's something I do different. I'll just leave that out there. You don't have to do it. You can follow the slap, slap, slap method. It works. They catch tons of fish doing it. As I say, it's something I do sometimes and not others. But I think one of the important things is to kind of take my philosophy on this is don't get hung up on, I got to do it this one specific way because that's the rules. No. You get out there and you fish effectively. That's the key. And so if you have to fish one way in one run and a different way in a different run, do it. You don't have to follow rules just because there is all these different flavors of Euro nymphing and they all have their own methods. I'm not saying they don't work. They do work, obviously. But, you don't have to be wedded to any one particular flavor of Euro nymphing unless you want to. And then that's your choice. If you like it, go for it. It's all about having fun, isn't it? So if you have fun as a challenge to adopt one particular method, that's cool too. But as I say, don't feel hamstrung by the need to stick to a method. It's a simple concept. We're using the weight of the flies to cast a leader, and we're not casting fly line. We're only got our leaders in the water. We never have our fly line in the water. And it's a short-range technique, and it's a very repetitive technique. Bang, 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 over. Cycling through little chunks of a run at a time. Really working it over. Moving on to the next bit, working it over. Which is kind of the reason why I don't do this very often, because it's not kind of my style of fishing. I'm more of an active fisherman. I like to keep moving. But nevertheless, I'm not knocking it. This really, really works. And it's obvious because the competition fishermen, guess what they're using? This method. Competition fishermen know what gets the fish. So if getting a lot of fish and getting big fish are really what you're after, you really should take in a look at your nymphing technique and make the effort to get good gear, especially the rod that is built for Euro nymphing that will do the job for you, has that very light, very active, very fast tip that will cast just the way to nymphs. So give it a try. You can, as you say, I make my own leaders. If you can't find, the stuff that's made for Euro Nymphing. You can always make your own. And it's a hell of a lot cheaper, I might add, too. So there you go. The introduction to Euro Nymphing. Cheers. Some potential. I've got that tree over there, which I'm going to work in a minute. I want to work the water in front of me first. There we go.